want to ask questions or register complaints, then they're going to do that to you, right? And then you're going to send it my way.
That's right. So this is, how we've done it in the past. Welcome everybody to the official MSC webinar Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Special treat today with MSC co-founder Professor Paul Arnston, who he told me just yesterday, this is his 48th year with Northwestern University. So we're very excited to have you with us, Paul. Everybody, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to Paul. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Toby, thanks for organizing this. And for you folks, thanks for taking a little time to put up with me and some of my wacko ideas. Okay, as such. The title of this thing is a little misleading. It's called From Polarizing to Inclusive Identities. Well, we're not going to get close to the actual inclusive stuff, but maybe we can move a little bit away from the polarizing stuff that's going on in our society and in our things. So, for 48 years, I've hosted experiential learning parties at Northwestern. And for the last 12 years, with the Buffett Institute, I've been sending groups of students, maybe 4 to 5, to countries in Africa, Vietnam, Central and South America, and some other places I can't remember, to work with not-for-profit organizations for 8 weeks in the summer. Okay, and then the reason I'm telling you this is my sort of experiential base for the ideas I'm sharing. And actually, for the last 15 years, I've sent students to work with not-for-profits for 2 whole quarters. And actually, I have them for the 3rd quarter at the beginning of the year, so a whole year, to work with organizations in Chicago and Evanston. Okay, so it's this, so this is not where, like, giving people questionnaires and having them fill them out or all that kind of stuff. Although I do a little bit of that just to point out that I haven't completely lapsed as a social scientist, but I'm close. All right, so here's what I'm going to do in this hour. I'm going to share with you some verbs, because I'm all about verbs, what we do, and also share with you some tools to how to help you, if you want to, build and sustain consensual interdependence with people who are very different than you and sometimes antagonistic. Okay, this has become in the end of my career here. It's my passion to work with NU and community citizens to build a more inclusive society. And we've got to be doing this, okay? If you've noticed what's going on in America and around the world. We don't really spend enough time, I think, thinking about this. So I at the very beginning, I hopefully asked you, maybe you did, and if you don't, I can just give you the highlights to read 3 short little gizmos. The first one that I want to just comment on is one by David Brooks. He's a thoughtful conservative. These days, I'm not even sure he's a conservative. But look, he points out that talking about inclusion and equity has not done much, if anything, for the common good. Okay, my wife of 52 years, Oive, has working for Head Start, as a consultant for Head Start, and since July, she's collected maybe 250 to 300 publications of various sorts, telling people how to be inclusive and how to and about equity. Okay, and then lots of these like webinars like we're doing, we can see about that. So, but it hasn't done much of any good. Okay, the studies are out there. So talking about this stuff, just talking about it, doesn't seem to do much. Okay, and maybe, in fact, in some cases, you can feel guilty about it, which is not the emotion we want. So the second article is even shorter, and one of my gurus and lifelong friends, lifelong meaning the 40-some years I've been at Northwestern, and fishing buddy, John McKnight, in this short article, suggested, as other people, that doing things together for the common good is how you can slowly build trust. You have to do things together. It's about the instrumental aspect of our lives with other people, not just the expressive aspect. Okay. Short story, my wife was the executive director of a number of organizations that was working with children, and she would have these dinner parties for the board members, and we would sit around the table and eat. And when we were eating, well, of course, the task was to eat and pass this, pass that, et cetera, et cetera. Then we would clear the tables, and we'd have some sort of dessert, and then we'd have coffee and tea and maybe some liquor, not much liquor in my family. And then we would sit around staring at these cups, trying to figure out what to say. Okay, so after a while, I figured out, why don't we? This is back in the sexist days, folks. I would invite the men, because there's all the women on the boards. I would invite the men to come to me to the kitchen and wash the dishes. First of all, I wouldn't have to wash them for after a period. It takes much longer. But once we started washing the dishes together, talk came easily. Is this making any sense to you? Okay, if the reason for what we're doing is to talk, it's much more difficult than if we're working, and then the talk becomes a lot easier. I learned this in bringing in hay and alfalfa up in Minnesota, with people I didn't know, and a lot of times they didn't know each other very well, but they all had to get this one damn crop in because it's so cold up there as such. So anyway, I'm beating this horse to death. So, and I don't want to do that. So anyway, I also had one other one-page rag that I wrote that emphasized 3 essential verbs and assumes a 4th one, listening to be surprised. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And that these verbs are essential for working with people who are different from you. Okay? And if you didn't get a chance to read that, it's just a one-page gizmo. But that pretty much organizes my life when I do work both with my students and when I do work in communities here locally across the country and also across the world. So if you haven't read those, I would maybe you can read them if you're interested. All right. So that's pretty much. Maybe I should stop. Does anybody have any questions, gizmos, hush puppies, kickback, pushback?
I have a question.
Thank God.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. I have a question about the idea of guilt versus shame. I do a lot of work in the DEI space at my office. And so I've read that shame, is the idea of like, I am bad. It's we internalize our feeling about the action, and it's not helpful towards change, but guilt can actually be motivating to change. So I wanted to get your thoughts as to, because we're struggling with the idea of like, do we make DEI training required? Should there be anything that's required? Is a certain level of guilt healthy? And I would just love to get your thoughts on that.
Wow. I think that my deal there is that I think guilt is one of the things that motivates all of us. Okay. And we could, as such, and certainly not shame. Shaming people is outrageous. For me, guilt is an internal thing, not an external thing. Does that make any sense to you?
Sure does.
Okay, so that's the best I can answer you with that.
Great, thank you, sir.
All right. Well, hey, thank you, Paul. Okay, I've been working hard for years. People say, Professor. I said, no, Professor, there's this hierarchical title in this institution, and my name's Paul. Okay, so that's it. But my students just don't do it until it takes a couple of quarters before they figure it out that they say professor, I ignore them.
For a few years.
Yes. Yeah. Now here's somebody who gave me a lot of trouble, and good trouble, by the way. So, okay. So hopefully you can, if there's not any other questions, maybe we can keep going. Oh, I talk about this, listening to be surprised. That's my number one thing. Listening to be surprised in terms of other people. okay? Because what we do, we tend to, particularly if they're different than us, why we, you know, stereotype them and we know what they're going to say before they say it, okay? And by the way, we do that with our kids too, which is a terrible thing. But I think we also need to listen to be surprised about what we ourselves say. Okay, so often when we get in these kind of situations, what comes out of our mouth isn't so good, but we just don't listen. All right, so I don't know. I certainly have had that problem. So if that's all right, this is sort of the, as some of you know, this is the sort of theoretical framework for what I'm doing. You know, I'm not big on theory. I'm an applied researcher. If you get up too high with theory, I get a nosebleed. Okay, so we're off and running. So now I'm just going to give you, I think, some slides that you can use and that I've used over the years to try to get how you can get people to articulate and then align their core values, their mutual self-interest, etc. And this I actually took from a graduate of the MSC program who was a consultant, and I changed it a lot, and of course I never acknowledged him. So that's you know, so hopefully I think he's not quite. I changed.
Randy's going to be disappointed in you, Paul.
Yes, I know. I know he is. So how about Kobe? You want to get that slide about shared core values up? That's it right there. Okay. So I do this in a lot of my classes and in almost all of the groups that I work with as such. And it's a way to get people to think about this. Now, some of my undergraduates say, what's a core value? All right, but using it. So, and also, as with the other things that I'm going to show you, I use Post-it notes because I have stock in 3M, but and I just have to acknowledge that. All right. So anyway, so you get people to identify these are personal core values in their lives, and they put them on Post-it notes. All right. And they have to put their names on them, and then you put them up on a board, all right, or a wall as such. And then people cluster their personal core values with others that seem similar. There's, you know, a poor person's cluster analysis, right? And then you have each person describe one value at a time how this core value of theirs operates in their lives. Okay, and that's really important. And then, you know, once it's repeated, then they try to cluster all these core values, find 3 of them that they all agree are their core values. And sometimes you have to change the language because it's not quite right and stuff. And importantly, if the members have time, you note where there's potential value conflict. Okay, and this is just a way to get things started and talk about this. Particularly, it's really tough for undergraduates, but I've also done it in corporations and a lot of it in community groups. And the reason for this is we need people to articulate and then align these core values and stuff. This is what's going to hold them together when they try to change things. And they're going to go back to these core values. Wait a minute, these are our core values. All right. I hope I'm not boring people too much anymore, but I'm just giving you these things. Okay, you want to use them, you can. If you don't, that's fine. All right, so the second little gizmo that I'm going to give you comes from the Asset-Based Community Development Institute that I've been part of since it got started. And this is this little hush puppy here. Okay. Okay. Now, in this, you know, how am I doing, Bozo, for time? Okay, and I'll stop and see if there's questions, pushbacks, or are you crazy, Paul things. So there used to be just 3: gifts of the heart, gifts of the head, gifts of the hands. That's what the ABCD Institute has. I had to put another one in, which is gifts of association, because this is one of the most powerful assets and gifts we have. What are the organizations, groups we belong to? This is our power base. And I'm an old community organizer, and I'll emphasize old. That's one of the first things I want to know about people. You know, Who do they belong to? What do they belong to? Are these organizations that somehow we can bring into whatever we're trying to change? Such. So anyway, that's it. So you find two for each of these things. Gifts of the heart are basically what's your passion. You know, what are you passionate about? What do you want to see changed? Okay, and then head. Things Sherry know about. Gifts of the hand. My students sometimes have a hard time figuring that out because this is not something that they've been asked. You know, I came from a working class family and worked on the farm, and by God, you had to have gifts of the hands in order to get to exist. And certainly when we're overseas, this is a very important thing when we're working in low income areas. So now we, and I've done a lot of work, and I think this will be my last example about this with people and parents who have people with disabilities. The Center for Independent Futures was started, I don't know how long ago it was, and their concern is once their kid gets to be 18 or 21. I didn't want this dog, but my granddaughter did, and so that's why we have it. Okay, please. Yeah. Anyway, the long and short of that is that there's they have to do something about their when their kid gets 21. Does kid stay with them for the rest of their lives? Does he go into some sort of group home or institution, or is there another alternative? So we have been doing this other alternative, which is building or renting places for groups of young people to live together, creating community, having a community builder on the top floor. And so we bring, so sometimes we'll have 25 to 30 people in a room, and we put all of this up on a board, and they're always, you know, I have to de-institutionalize them. They have been institutionalized in terms of their kids being taken care of in school and with things. And now, it's particularly in Illinois, by the way, it's just like you fall off a cliff. All right, so then I'll get maybe 25 or 30 people in a big board, and they will put up all these gifts and associations. We'll have one section for you know, what they belong to, things they're passionate about. Usually their kids and a lot of things in their heads and their heart and stuff. And then just doing that, and then we sit down and we say, all right, here's the power in this room. How can we do, what can we do? Okay, and how can we help each other get it done? Okay. So that's the second two verbs that are important. We have to discover, and then we have to mobilize the gifts and assets of people. Okay, ourselves first, and then others if we're going to accomplish. And again, this is particularly important when we're working with people who are not like ourselves and who may even be sort of antagonistic. Okay, and I'll bring that up about this particular example a little bit later. So I'm going to stop right now. I've shared with you two just very simple tools that you can use. Who wants to ask a question, push back, point out how crazy I am? Anybody?
This is Wendy, and I don't want to say that you're crazy, but one of the things that I appreciate about what you're sharing, and I think is foundational for good strategic communicators, is the sense of empathy and what you're sharing, because that's a big word that can mean a lot and can be personal. I think the documents you're sharing help to peel the onion back on what we mean when we say that, but also what we mean as the strategic value that we bring to people and organizations looks a lot like that.
Yeah, I've done both of these exercises at IBM, where they've asked me to come in and do that. Okay, particularly once they get new graduates, and these of course are hot shots because you're not hired at IBM. Well, this used to be the way it is, kind of what it is now. And
hey, Paul, I think the example, the gifts example too, is a very good way of self-definition.
Yes.
And being able to focus on who you really are, because I think that we tend to kind of amble along without defining that stuff, and this is probably a good way to just remain focused on who we are.
Right. And I think that's really important. Okay. So while what we're doing is we are definitional to the extent that we share these things with other people. It's also it's a self-feedback loop, right? All right. Okay. If there's not anything else, how are we doing here, Bozo? Okay, not bad. That's, by the way, has been one of my nicknames over the years that my students use when they want to get my attention on an email. That they put Bozo in the subtitle thing, and some of them actually that's fine. That they'll raise their hand and they'll say, "Hey, Bozo," and for me, I love it. Okay.
Did you give them a good grade?
Oh yeah, they get a higher grade. But hey, Lauren, I don't give a hoot about grades, right? Grades are the worst motivator for learning I've ever run into. So, as you know, I flunked out of UCLA after 2 years and ended up with a 2.21 undergraduate grade point average. Thank God that I was writing at the same time. All right, so we got that. So. Well, I think I have another thing that I'd like to share with you, and that is I use this book all the time, and I think it's particularly good to move from polarizing to more inclusive identities. It's called Difficult Conversations. I've used it in the MSC classes, and I use it in tons of my other classes, and also when I'm doing these workshops and gizmos and hush puppies. I think there's a slide for that. Is there not, Toby, that we can rock and roll here? This is about stories and about three stories that operate simultaneously.
Sure, hold on. Which one is it? I'll share my screen and you can point to it.
Okay.
Shared core values, workshop instructions. We did that. Zoom gifts, week 2 slides, difficult conversations checklist.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, I skipped one slide, which I may come back to at the end if I have enough time, but also I need to leave time for questions and hush puppies. This is just a quick outline of this very thin little book. This is from the Harvard Negotiation Project folks who wrote Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, and they've written some other things. I like this one the best, okay? And basically, and I also like it because, hey, it's about communication. And so there's 3 conversations or stories, 3 levels of what we're doing whenever we're with another person, right? So the first one is what happened. That's when there's difficulties, when there's antagonism, what actually happened as such. But that's sort of the surface level. All right. Then there's the second level below that. This is when it's difficult and stuff, and that's our emotional attachments to what happened. And of course, we have very different definitions of what happened. All right, as such. So. And then below that, and this is why we're talking about identity, your emotions are grounded in your identity. And when something happens with another person, your identity is being attacked. And of course, you got to protect that hush puppy, all right, as such. So then they suggest these steps, and I'm not going to walk all the way through them, but you have to decide whether or not to raise this issue. And of course, for what's been going on in this country in terms of race relations, you have to raise the issues, right? Although we have suppressed them for a long damn time. And basically what happens is you have 2 stories with people who are in some sort of polarizing in terms of identities. You have my story, and then you have the other person's story. And so where do you start? Well, they suggest, and I think this is brilliant, you start with the third story. the story of the two of them to get what is the different story, and that's where you start. So you're not attacking the other person's story, and more importantly, you're not advocating yours yet. Okay, and then you can see exploring their story, exploring yours, and exploring that third story. Okay, and then at the very end, of course, and this goes back to some of their other books, you have to invent options that meet the other person's story. And they have to do the same for you. And then out of those options can maybe come some sort of reconciliation and you moving forward. The other thing, if you talk, which I spend a lot of time talking about in my classes, is what we call criteria, agreeing upon criteria for what is an appropriate answer as such. And those are those standards. And we have to find out what those are. And of course, if nothing else, you have to talk about communication. All right. In terms of solving the problem, not as an end in itself. All right. I just zipped through that 90-page book.
Is it difficult conversations, how to discuss what matters most? Is that this book? That's the book. Okay, great.
Yep. Yeah. I've Martha and I have used it. That's how we stayed married for 52 years. Well, really, it's just I just say yes, you're right, and that works sometimes. But she doesn't trust that answer. So, okay, well, we can get out of this hush puppy. Okay. And the next slide.
Professor, can I ask you a question?
Oh, okay, hey, let's stop right here. And we got lots of times for questions and stuff. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Patrick. I'm going to call you Professor, even though you don't want to.
That's okay.
On the framing of that conversation, do you find it dependent upon the generation that you're speaking to? And once again, is the response that you obtain also based upon the generation that you're talking to? In other words, if you've got a millennial that you're talking to, in other words, what I'm suggesting is that I've been a lawyer now for 35 years, and it appears that if I'm going to frame a conversation on a difficult conversation with a younger lawyer, say somebody who's 25 as opposed to one who's 65, it seems that I have to frame it different. But more importantly than framing it, regardless about how I frame it, it seems that the responses that I get, although somewhat uniform, are different depending upon the generations that are involved. Can you give me an indication of what you think about that?
Yeah, well, for a number of years, I taught a course at Northwestern called Intergenerational Communication, and it was all about how we understand stories differently. How every story has a causal structure to it. Does this make any sense to you? A causal structure. And the fact is, if we're in different generations, we have different causal structures about how we understand our stories. It could be actually the same story, but that underlying causal structure can be vastly different. And so that's where you've got to, okay, here's this surface hush puppy. Now let's get down and see what's the structure that's generating it. So, and also for a while, I taught legal communication with Steve Lubit, who was at the very famous law professor at Northwestern, and also with a bunch of lawyers. And basically, what he does and what I do is it's basically legal communication is two people telling different stories, and stuff. And so, if you understand it from that perspective, then you're going to have people who are thinking differently. Well, just think of our race relations things, where we have people who are living in different contexts, and certainly in terms of what's going on in terms of the causality in their lives are so different. And it's been when I worked on the west side of Chicago and the south side, people had so little control over their lives compared to me. And so that's the first thing we had to work out, is what we call locus of control. It's tough. And I think that's also intergenerational.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Other questions? Hush, gizmos? Pushbacks? This may not be what you expected, but this is what my passion is right now. Getting people to create more inclusive and a more inclusive and equitable world. And we can talk about it all we want to, but what I have done over the last 15 or 20 years is actually create the context by which people actually have to do this with people who are different than themselves. It's the only way you learn, as far as I'm concerned. No other questions? Gizmos, hush puppies? I got to stop using those terms. I've used them all my life. And by the way, that's getting worse because it's getting harder and harder for me to retrieve nouns. So anyway, now I just want a bucket of what? Uh-oh.
Hush puppy.
Hush puppies? Okay.
They're delicious.
Oh, okay. You're right. You're right. All right. So let's then move to that.
Community planning is the next one I have.
Yeah. Is there one before that? I think I skipped. There's the, oh yeah, no, that it is. And then we're going to go to the capacity inventory one, right? Okay. All right. So here's what I've been talking about, and here's sort of what I encourage people to do who are trying to make changes and work with people who are different than themselves in so many ways. And again, it's these bloody verbs. You have to know your own personal values and goals, and by the way, self-interest, which is the main motivator, and you have to turn that into what we call mutual self-interest. And this is something that every person who writes about change, whether from a corporate perspective or a community perspective, says you have to have some sort of core. You have to have a group that's doing that with you. Well, for one reason, that if it's just you who's doing it, you don't have anybody who confirms that you're not crazy. Right? So you got a group that's crazy. And so that's better than one person as such. But that's out of that comes comes power. And so, it's yourself, it's your core group that you have to articulate in line. And then you got to go to the community and find out where they are. And that's what I have my students do, both in overseas and right now I've got a group working with a group that's actually working across the country to try to stop the death penalty. And so they're working in various organizations, and what they're doing, obviously, is they've got to find the values and goals of communities and stuff. And, I don't know how you feel about the death penalty, but the state, Virginia just got rid of the death penalty. That was a big thing if you're not particularly. The thing about the death penalty is we may kill 15 to 20% of the people that are on death row who shouldn't be there, okay, for all sorts of reasons. They didn't do it, or their mental capacities are so diminished. But that's another story. So, all right, so you figure all that out, and then you figure out the community. And so you got to go out and do what we call a community audit, okay? And you need to become a cartographer of values, a cartographer of interest, and a cartographer of all the different kinds of groups that exist. So once you've done that, and by the way, you can keep doing it, then you got to discover and mobilize the assets like we talked about. You have to know yourself. And sometimes you know yourself to the extent, hey, I shouldn't be doing this because I just don't have any personal assets or resources I can contribute to this thing. And then, of course, you got your core group that has to figure this out. And then you have to find these core assets in the community, because that's the way it's going to get done. But no, there's a D there, and that is sometimes you have to go outside the community. That's when you bring in other assets and other groups. That's a dangerous move, because what you can end up doing is the community, again, starts to depend upon these outside groups, and then they don't have any personal responsibility. Okay, so when I'm doing this work, that 2D is the last thing you want to do. Okay, for so many people and in the community, that's the first thing they want to do. There's nothing in this community, so let's go and find some assets and resources that can help us, which ends up being a dependency move. All right, well, shut up, Paul. That's the other thing I use a lot in my classes now. And I encourage people in class to say, shut up if I'm talking too much or getting on a tangent. So feel free to do that, okay? I will not take it personally. This number 3 is interesting. I've had students over the 48 years or so who go out and they advocate and they do a lot, and they come back and they say, here's what we need to do. And the community members will say, we tried that 2 years ago. Nothing is more embarrassing. Okay. And so people need to identify the personal, group, community, and institutional barriers to meeting the group's goals and how to overcome them. Okay, as such. Now, if you've done 1, 2, or 3 systematically with the people in your group and with the community you're working with, then you can move to 4. Here's what I have found over the years. So much of people who want to change things, they start with number 4. They do not systematically look at resource, do articulating and aligning and discovering and mobilize. And of course, this is what management schools teach, and undergraduate management degrees teach. All right, let's and I just amalgamated a lot of different things here, as such. Right? You've all done this, I'm sure. Had a work plan that you've worked on with other people. But if you haven't systematically done 1, 2, and 3, this work plan is, I think, almost always guaranteed to fail in some way. And then at the end there's something called 4G. And for a long time, I taught evaluation research, and there's all these boring books or pamphlets and stuff. And then someone pointed out, really, you're just answering 4 questions, simple questions. Who specifically does what, when, and how do we know it's being done? And as long as the group you're working with and the community that they answer those 4 questions together, now you've got a chance. Okay, but if you're just doing it, or if there's some executive committee just doing it and stuff, it probably is going to fall apart. I hope this is making some sense. Okay, but here's the deal. Once the group has solved the problem, so to speak, done a solution and come up with solutions, stuff, they're out of there. And we got one more really important decision or set of decisions we have to make, and that's answering those 4 questions in bold, and then holding each other mutually accountable for them. All right, shut up, Paul. So before we move on to one other really goofy thing, what do people think about this community planning and implementation process? Obvious insights into the obvious? I mean, that's basically what I do.
I have another question.
Good.
So thinking about this from the perspective of Leslie DeChurch's class, where we learned that in a group of 12, 3 people do a vast majority of the talking. How do you ensure that even in a forum like this, which does seem so open and positive, that you are actually getting the full representation of views of the community in order for the plan established and step forward to be effective.
Well, I would never have 12 people in the group. I don't know, I'm serious.
Oh, you're right.
You
You're
got
right.
you got 12, and I've made this recommendation to a lot of organizations. You got 12 people in a group, there's that 7 plus or minus 2 famous research by Professor Miller, who's since passed. We can take into account about 7 or so people or other things at one time. Any more than that, and we group them, we categorize them. So why the hell don't we just do that? So I never want, when I work with people, so let's say if you have 12, I would say, okay, that you got 2 groups of 6. Now, if you want to, they can work in the same thing, or they can work on sort of complementary things like that, and then they bring it back together. Okay?
Great, thanks, Paul.
Okay. Anything else? Well, then let's go from the sublime to the ridiculous, okay? And maybe some of you think that's what he's been doing the whole damn time. I think there's something called a capacity inventory there, Ace. I hope there is. All right, we'll jump through this. There's something that we'll jump through this. Maybe we'll summarize with this if I can't get this other thing up. All right. So here, some of you who've taken my class have probably seen these things. And so, hey, consensual interdependence. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get people to do, such, okay, who are very different in some cases. So how do you build and sustain consent? Well, there are those 4 verbs. Move to the next slide, sir. All right, so these are 4 moves that you make whenever you and other people are trying to change something. You make them whether you know it or not. Or let me put it another way. You cannot not make them if you're really going to change something. Okay, so the first one is, how do we move from diversity to divergence? You can have all the measures of diversity, and many of them are markers that are obvious in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, age, a bunch of other things. Okay, but those aren't really the kind of divergence that we're looking for. So let's see how we move from diversity to divergence. So let's move to the next slide, Coach. All right. When people say to me, I want to celebrate diversity, one of my first answers is nuts. I'm not interested in celebrating the markers of diversity. I'm interested in discovering all the divergent thinking and the divergent gifts and the divergent perspectives that can come out of that diversity. Okay. And Northwestern's been terrible at patting itself on the back about its great diversity, but they have many times they have not taken that diversity and found the divergence that's important out of it. Okay, and I've had some lovely arguments with various administrators about that. All right, so hey, if you don't make this move, then there's norms of political correctness or dominating personalities and positions, and you end up with repression in terms of you don't get that divergence. You don't get the arguments, okay? You don't get the different perspectives that you need. The positive one is every person has, how am I doing here? I got to stop soon. And every idea has an equal opportunity to be heard. All right, move on there, Coach. Move. We won't talk about this brainstorming thing. Let me just say that when I listen to groups that have done brainstorming for problem solving, I just say, this isn't problem solving, this is BS. There's another word for that, okay? All right, and so you've got to do those, check out those 4 C's, all right? So, hey, let's see that we've got good divergence. How do we converge? This is a 64-cent question, dollar question, okay? Well, if you converge in a certain way, powerful and dominant people or ideologies determine what's right to do. And we got a little oppression coming. The positive thing is, and this is a tough one, every idea is fairly evaluated against two things: previously agreed upon evidence and and criteria. So next page, next gizmo hush. So here's the challenge for leadership, for a collaborative leadership with people who are different and perhaps slightly upset, is this. Here's, got these disagreements about what we should do. So we have got to go up the abstraction ladder to say, have we agreed upon some core criteria or core values or a vision that we can then use those to sort out the different options about how we're going to take care of this problem. Okay, another way of saying this, the only way you problem solve is if people have things they agree upon that they can use to sort out things they disagree upon. Fair enough? Simple idea. And it drives me crazy that so much of the time that doesn't happen. But that's just half of this ladder. We also have to go down, and this is the thing that's blowing my mind right now in this country. We have to go back and we have to agree upon a set of facts and statistics and evidence, right? And so we end up using the facts, the statistics, and evidence to say, okay, which of these options that we need to try best meet, based upon these facts and evidence, best meets the criteria and core values that we've all agreed upon. And this is what right now, these alternative facts and all, I mean, this is craziness. But then we all know that. All right, and we're getting there close to the end, folks. So flip it there, sir. All right. Ta-da, we've converged. We've done so fairly rationally. Okay, and now we have to act. Well, one of the funny things is that often people go through this decision-making process. They bring in all sorts of people who are sort of agitated, and we come up with this idea, and then we take it to somebody else to implement it, and nothing happens. I have been part of groups like that for years. All right, well, if nothing happens, or only a few members are responsible to make it happen, like the executive committee or 3 or 4 people like that, we get burnout in both cases, and we get people who will never come back to the table to work again with other people who are different to come up with the common good. We, for a year and a half in this city, this was years ago, we had, I worked with a bunch of people very hard to get all the different parts of this community in Evanston together to try to problem solve things about violence around Evanston Township High School, which, by the way, we still have. We came up with this thing, and we presented this to all the, the muckety mucks in the city and in the school, things like that. Nothing happened. You couldn't invite those people back to talk about this again, to save your whatever. All right. So the positive thing is when it happens, and this is really important, everyone is mutually accountable to enact the agreed upon the plan. Based upon the assets and gifts of the people in the group, they do different things, but still they are responsible. And this is, this makes me very nervous when I get asked to be on some sort of group that's doing this. The last gizmo here, and then we're just about done. Okay, last thing that is, was this one more slide, isn't there? Action to learning. Yeah, I'm sorry. There it is. Does anyone ever learn anything about this? And this is the only way we make a group better. We make a city better. We make the university better, is once we have done something with people who are different than us, and it's sort of there's tension in the air. Okay, no one learns from what we've done, or only the leaders and the elites get feedback and for what they've done. Well, we create a competency gap. Okay. The positive thing is everyone has the opportunity to improve their leadership and decision-making competencies. Okay. And we have to plan for that. Here's a simple suggestion. At the next meeting, maybe it's a monthly meeting, maybe whatever it is. The first thing you do in this meeting, say, what have we learned from what we did from the last meeting? That's the first thing on the agenda. And, you know, people give me lip service and say, oh, yeah. So they have it on the last thing on the agenda because they got all these other important things to do. And of course, the damn thing never gets done. All right, I think that's it. I hope I haven't, do I have any time left here? I've got about 10 minutes or 5 minutes left. Responses, let's see, what else? Is there anything? Chip. Oh, hey, can you click this very last thing just for a quickie? Yeah. Okay, move it down if you will. More, is there more than that? Is that it?
That's it.
I thought, oh, the hell with that then. Okay. I have this, move it up to the top, please, just for a minute. If you're interested, I have a capacity inventory that people fill out before they do something and then after it's done. And it's been very, very interesting and illuminates a lot of things. But anyway, now, so we got this little time left. And are there questions, hush puppies, gizmos?
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm completely clear on the last slide where you're going from groups that try to solve issues,
Yes.
and then taking it out more broadly.
Okay.
And how do you get the buy-in? As you said, the danger is only the elites learn and the people who are involved in the actual process. How do you put that out in a way that allows everyone to learn? And there's a communication issue there, right?
Oh, a big communication issue, yeah. Yeah, partly it is, well, look, they've got this thing, I don't really care how they came to it, et cetera, you know, so there's that thing. Or, man, they failed miserably. The hell, I want to hear anything, you know, either way, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. You almost need, in a city or in a university, you need it should be in a university, a learning unit that is their responsibility to do that. Okay. And every time there's action that people have engaged in who are in terms of difference, and there's been collaborative decision-making and stuff, it's not just to report the results out, but to report how it was done. Okay. But
you're at the very beginning. You're not even close to solving anything. You know, all you put is the framework in place, and now somebody has to commit to making that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what I'm going to give you. Toby, do I have a few more minutes to just run through a couple of, and these are just examples in my life. Okay. Palestinians and Israeli young people get together in the East-West Orchestra by Daniel Barenboim, who put it together, and they make beautiful music. And it was something that they did. It was an action, and it's been a great success over the years. Of course, there's been people attacking on either side. That's an example. India, Muslims and Hindus, you know, every once in a while there's some provocation, and they have you know, a bus gets burned or a mosque or temple gets burned and stuff like that. And in some cities, riots erupt, and it's terrible. In other cities, over about 40 years, there have been no riots. Why? Well, there was this great political scientist who did this study, and basically he found in those cities where there were no riots and stuff, there were, and this was what Gandhi did in the 20s and 30s. He created agricultural co-ops. He created trade associations. He created a whole bunch of things that had both Muslims and Hindus in it. And they were much less likely to have violence, you know? But in other cities where those didn't exist, or where the government would put together these groups to talk about issues and differences in religion, not a chance. of that helping. Okay, so when you do something,
Paul, I have a friend who developed a not-for-profit organization called Play for Peace.
oh yeah, well, I know that one. Okay, yeah.
Michael.
Michael.
Yeah. And the whole goal behind that was to get kids to be together, so when they grew up, they wouldn't be apart.
Right.
You know, so.
Well, play is a wonderful is work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, why am I still doing this at my age? Because they are paying me to play with people, you folks, and play with ideas. As soon as I think that you know, I'm working, I'm retiring. But how can you retire from play? All righty, a couple of minutes. Let me just give you a couple of other ones. Well, look, I'm half Swede and half Norwegian, I guess a quarter Finn stuff. And those people, they were fighting, but when they came over in the 1800s, and it was, the 1800s, I couldn't understand why they all moved to upper Minnesota or upper Wisconsin. Why the hell did they go there? Well, that's because it was the same as the places they were over there. You bring in one crop of hay or alfalfa or thing. So everybody, even though they were fighting and there were wars over there, when they came over, they had to work together to get that crop in. Okay. Well, out of that, you know, now I've, that's why I, you know, that I hope that makes sense to you. I have one last thing, and I have a brother-in-law, Walter Nakamura. His father, before World War II, along with two other Caucasian folks, they built a race car from scratch. They had a big Cadillac engine in it, and the frame, and then they, with aluminum and a lot of other things, they built this race car. Then along came World War II, and all of a sudden, Walter and his parents were put in a euphemistically called an intern camp. It was a concentration camp, you know, for the Japanese. And then after the war, the car sort of got lost, but about 10 years ago, the car surfaced. And so now it's in the Peterson Automobile Museum in Los Angeles, which is one of the most famous automobile museums. But more importantly, the deal was is here you had a Japanese man and his wife, and you had these two Caucasian families working together to build this automobile. Okay, see, that's the idea. You work together to do something, and out of that you can transcend all the other things that were going on then, which was, you know, pretty terrible between Japanese Americans here and Caucasians. All right, so that's, I think, the end of my my gizmos. It's a great story. All right. Any final things? I hope this was sort of worth your while. I mean, I didn't report several you know, statistical studies, but believe me, this is all the foundation for really hundreds of working with different organizations across the world to see what works and doesn't work. Thanks for putting up with me. Thanks for being part of the MSC program. Okay, and I hope you all stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. A couple quick announcements before you sign off. We do have some future events, and so I have links to these. Oh, what did I just do? Click the wrong button. There we go. Coming up on the 17th is a fireside chat with Annalise Riles, the executive director at the Buffett Institute. And then we also have an MSC Alumni Association meeting coming up the next Saturday, where we're going to elect a new slate of leadership there. And then 2 weeks from today, we have our final two MSC Wednesday webinar sessions. 2 weeks from today, we're going to be having a conversation interview with Jatan Bosby, class of 2013, who is currently the executive director of the ACLU in Alabama. And then 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that, Professor Rick Morris is going to wrap up our season talking about a paper that he wrote about the largely futile attempts to regulate social media. So those are the many events coming up. Hopefully we'll see as many of you as possible at 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those. But Paul, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you talk about what's on your mind. And we're just extremely blessed to have been witness today. So thank you very much for sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Thank you for the invitation. It caused me to look for my mind. Okay.
Excellent. All right. On that note, everyone, thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.